Good morning, everybody. It's 9:30 in the morning here in Bonn, so we're going to crack on with today's webinar. I would like to introduce you. It's a beautiful sunny Monday morning here, and I hope it is a lovely Monday morning where you are too. I am very happy to open this second webinar on environment and health in seaport cities, held jointly between the WHO Regional Office for Europe and the Union for the Mediterranean. My name is James Krozek. I am the Communications Officer for the European Centre for Environment and Health in Bonn, and I will be moderating today's session. Just before we really get cracking on, a couple of housekeeping questions. Please, at the bottom of your screen, please select the language that you would like to listen to in this webinar. This webinar is held in English, but with simultaneous translation in French. So we will be swapping between, there will be the possibility also to ask your questions in French, because we encourage you to put your questions in the chat, and also comments that you might have or perspectives that you would like to share. And we'll see how we get on with time, but we may be able to take a clarification question after each presentation. But at the very least, we do look forward to having your questions, and we will see how many we manage to get through. Vous pouvez poser les questions en français dans le chat. We have a diverse audience today. The webinar is addressed to and targeted for national coordinators and focal points of the Union for Mediterranean and WHO member states for urban development, urban regeneration, and housing, environment, and health. But it's also for the representatives of seaport cities and port authorities, public authorities dealing with urban projects at the national, regional, and local levels, but also universities, NGOs, and other key stakeholders. So with that, I would again welcome you all here. I hope everybody is connected and has no technical issues and can hear and the translations working well. And with that, we would like to kick off with opening remarks and an introduction by Senaya Netanyahu. Senaya is the program manager at the European Centre for Environment and Health here in Bonn, and the manager for Environment and Health Impact Assessment. So Senaya, would you like to give us the opening words?
Thank you very much, James. I'm also speaking here from Bonn. And while you were speaking, there was a confusion in the interpretation channels between the English and the French, but I think it's sorted out. Can somebody confirm that? Okay, all right. So good morning, everybody, and I'm very happy to open the meeting today. This is the second webinar on seaport cities on the aspect of environment and health. We are here at the European Centre for Environment and Health, and this is basically a major think tank for the WHO Regional Office for Europe. We are in touch with the 53 member states across the European region. We work with ministries of health, but also with ministries of environment. And this is very unique in that aspect, because that way it allows us to discuss priorities for action on environmental health with all the 53 member states that we work with. In 2017, in the 6th Ministerial Conference on Environment and Health that was held in Ostrava, the declaration was adopted where 1 out of 7 areas of focus was supporting cities and regions in the European region in their effort to become healthier, but also more inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable through an integrated, smart, and health-promoting approach to urban and spatial planning. So this is one topic that was declared by the member states, our 53 member states in the region, that it's very critical and important for them to focus. So focusing on seaport cities is part of this effort. The WHO also has a European work plan, it's called EPW, for the years of 2020-2025, and it also addresses the need to support the local living environment and well-being in member states and promote safer, healthier, and better lives, while also addressing aspects of inequalities in the region. With the recent COVID pandemic, WHO also published a manifesto for healthy recovery from COVID-19. Many of the prescriptions, there were 6 of them, for healthy and green recoveries are related to today's webinar. This include build healthy, livable cities, protecting nature, healthy energy transition, and health and sustainable food systems, and also stop using taxpayer money to fund pollution. Environmental health is a cross-cutting challenge and can only be tackled successfully through actions in various sectors. And this also applies to seaport cities and health. Seaport are vital connecting hubs for international trade, port-related industry, and passengers travel. As such, they influence urban spatial planning and development, and we will hear about it today. They also attract thousands of employees who work on ships and onshore to operate various port and industry-related activities. And in that regard, it's very difficult to separate between the offshore and the onshore activities because they are related, as we will also show today and discuss it. While seaport and the related onshore and offshore activities contribute to urban economies, they also add pollutions, for example, to the air, the soil, noise, water, and also contribute to greenhouse gas emissions and to risk of occupational illness and also infectious diseases through shipments of goods and passengers. Landscape changes and risk of biodiversity are also to be noted. These emissions and risk can potentially have negative consequences for human health and the environment, including through climate change. Therefore, the discussion today is an important milestone in the development of WHO's document on the environment and health in European cities, seaport cities, and that hopefully will provide different actors in different sectors evidence and information on good practices on the environment, in seaport cities, and the impact of on health and inhabitants in seaport cities. Today, we also mark a continuation of our work, WHO collaboration with the Union for the Mediterranean, under the Memorandum of Understanding that was developed by the both organization. In the year of 2020. Both organizations will collaborate across sectors in reinforcing the implementation of the 2030 agendas for sustainable development. This institutional partnerships aims also to support the Union for the Mediterranean and WHO member states in building capacities in promoting actions for health, including through health research, education, advocacy of health, for health, and in all policy domains. So in this context, with this webinar will raise awareness about and also promote health environments through urban development and governance in seaport cities. I would like to thank you, Union for the Mediterranean, especially the partnership with Victoria, for this collaboration and partnership with our office, and I wish you all a very interesting webinar. Thank you.
You are mute, James.
Thank you, Sanaya. Can you hear me?
Yes. No.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Sanaya. Thank you for the opening words. Now, on behalf of our co-host, the Union for the Mediterranean, I would like to pass to Victoria Jimenez, who is the head of sector for urban development. Victoria.
Thank you, James. I will be very brief, and let's see if we can keep the time. I'm head of sector at the Union for Urban Development at the Union for the Mediterranean. I'm in charge of the UfM regional platform for sustainable urban development. We are, Sinaya is addressing ministers in charge of health and environment. From our side, we are working with ministries in charge of housing and urban development. But with Sinaya, we thought that we could cooperate together on urban health. Some time ago, we already organized a first webinar on health issues, on seaport and health concretely. Last year, we are very happy of doing that with Sinaya. From our side, we have our member states agreed on an action plan that was drafted by TU Delft. Carola here was part of the drafting team. One of the topics that was highlighted there to be agreed was for cities, and so somehow this webinar is part of this endeavor. From our side, we are also preparing a physical meeting addressing port cities for the end of September. You might receive an invitation in this regard. In this case, the aim of the meeting will be to discuss urban regeneration projects in port cities, but we'll see, we will try to explore with SINAIA how we can involve the health city in this annual gathering that we are aiming to launch either this year or in the coming years. And that would be all. I give the floor back to you to start the meeting.
Thank you, Victoria. After those introductions from our hosts, we would like to kick on with the technical content now of the session. And to start us off, we have César Ducreux, I hope I pronounced that correctly, he is a research director for the French National Center for Scientific Research, CNRS, at the Research Laboratory Economics. And César is going to give us an overview of the WHO report on environment and health in seaport cities, and particularly focusing on key findings and research gaps. So, César. César, you're muted at the moment.
Okay.
I think that should work now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thanks a lot, James. Thank you, Victoria and SINAIA and everybody to be here today. I'm very happy to give some insights about what we have done. It has been a great adventure to dig these issues in Europe, European port cities, and we have done a nice work, I think, and nice work from a nice team of researchers, and this is not always the case. So I must say that it was a great experience. So from this experience, there are 4 points that are important to mention. So because this report is a kind of really innovates in many ways compared with the existing knowledge or literature, but also in terms of understanding how actors are approaching environmental and health issues in the port cities and so on. So it is, this report provides a systemic perspective on these issues, linking both, as SINAIA said already, offshore and onshore areas. We comprehensively review the different types of pollutions, impacts, and their sources as well. Because most of the time, we can get sometimes a little bit lost, as a port city is a huge concentration of activities, and it is sometimes difficult to have a full picture of the situation. We also provide a state-of-the-art technological and organizational review of different solutions. So what are the solutions provided by actors at different levels and in different places within the port city? And it is also original by its continental perspective, covering as much as possible the whole of the WHO European region. So I will present key findings from the academic literature also from available data, what we can say, and mainly from the observation of local practices. And I will finish with some gaps and limitations, because this study is, I think, a first step into the full understanding of the situation. And it is only a first step also in order to provide recommendations and so on. So about the literature, I will not go into the detail, but what was striking is the enormous amount of studies about environmental problems in port cities since the 1990s, more or less, an increasing number, but a striking lack of research on health issues. So what I mean is that, for example, you have many works measuring pollution with many nice maps and statistics, or providing solutions to change the engines of trucks and pollute less, and so on. So many discussions to improve the situation from an environmental perspective, but a very a huge lack of evidence about what is exactly the impact of port-related activities on the local population. So we found a maximum of 4 papers actually giving clear, straightforward results about the mortality of people around the port, or their more likely their vulnerability linked with maritime activities. And this was something very striking, the lack of health studies in a port context. Another side of our report is what I said previously, is to provide a very, very, well, maybe not yet exhaustive, but I think near exhaustive overview of issues on the left and solutions on the right. So for each issue, you usually can find some solution, but not always. So there are many blanks in the solution table, so which means that we are able to address which problems are not solved yet, and what is their degree of difficulty, severity. So this is for the qualitative aspect. For the quantitative aspect, it has been possible to collect some data for European port cities. On the right, you have the most simple approach, which is already something. When you look at population and traffic, you can see that the two indicators tend to overlap. So more traffic is close to more population. So it means that more population is usually exposed to a lot of port activity, which means that there is a high risk for a majority of inhabitants of congestion combined with pollution in the largest cities, like Barcelona, Athens and Piraeus, or Rotterdam, Hamburg, and so on. In terms of specialization, we could also find that not necessarily the largest, but port cities specialized in dry bulk, like grain, cereals, coal, or minerals, they tend to pollute more in the atmosphere. So there is not only a size effect of the volume of traffic, but also an effect of the composition of traffic. In terms of actions of actors, it is interesting to see that individual actions of port authority or municipality, what we have recorded in the press or in reports or in many, many different sources, you can see on the map, they concentrate in the northwest of Europe, mainly. We also can see that the larger port cities like Southampton, Rotterdam, Marseille, Valencia, they are situated in both types of projects to tackle environmental issues and health issues. They are positioned in transport fluidity and energy transition. So these two main categories of projects are seen in mostly in the larger port cities. Energy transition covers a lot of different solutions. Transport fluidity is to facilitate cargo transfer to avoid congestion and pollution emissions. But you see on the map that the Mediterranean is quite absent from individual actions, but it is not the case when you look on the left. It's a table summarizing the different collective action projects about sustainable port cities. And most of the projects include a majority of southern port cities in Europe. They are not on the map, but we could have made a map of this project, and you would see that the south of the Mediterranean is actually dominant. And you see Valencia in Spain is recurrently a leading port for this project. This can be European EU, European Commission projects, research projects, collaboration, exchange, information exchange project, and so on. Another part of our work has been to collect strategic documents for specific port cities and to run interviews with some actors involved in health issues. So this is the fieldwork part of our report. You can see some documents here with some noise maps or the concentration of noise in cities in France. In the down left part, it's a map of the mortality rate at the very, very thin level within the Dunkirk port city, which shows that the mortality is higher close to the port, for example. These kind of documents that help us to understand the effects of port activities on the local population. 3 case studies in the north and the south of Europe have been investigated by the team, which are specific, which occupy a specific place in the report because they are really in-depth studies looking at strategies, planning initiatives, economic trends, and so on. And a collection of data and tables and figures. So they are quite interesting to see. I will finish now with some gaps and limitations. So we have the high quality evidence on health impacts is sparse. As I said, we have very few studies that prove or demonstrate scientifically that there is a link between the disease recorded in a certain population close to the port and the port activity itself. So it is probably very difficult to do, but it has been done in only a few cities, and why not in other cities? Only in Italy, actually, which is quite interesting. A majority of monographs, we really lack of international comparative studies. We need the efforts to address environmental problems, which are many and many efforts, are carried out, but without considering the health aspects. So it is usually taken for granted that the effort will improve the situation, which is probably true. There is a difficulty to analyze the respective impacts of the different pollutions. So as if the port city is big, then the mix of activities makes the measure even more difficult. The location of monitoring stations which record air pollution, for example, is not uniform across countries and port cities. So this is also a problem that makes it difficult to compare port cities in terms of their level of pollution and so on. Port-related activities remain not well defined, as well as the scale of the area to be taken into consideration to measure pollution or to measure impacts. What is the exact definition of the port city? Should it be the pure administrative definition? Should it be the morphological area, the functional area with daily commuting flows? We know well in geography that the definition of a city is a big issue, and it has a lot of implications. Well, I will not go through every point. In terms of actions, and I think that one conclusion is that port cities need a more integrated approach to environment and health, because there is a multiple set of actors and a multiple set of actions, but they are not always coordinated with each other. So I take an example, like if you create a green zone, a green buffer in a transition area between the port and the city, then it doesn't mean that activities will stop, the polluting activities will stop, and it doesn't mean that the wind will not blow the dust or the smoke in the city. So there is a need to really take into consideration all aspects of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, César. I am also monitoring the chat here, so just for all participants, if you have questions, we will have an opportunity later to come back to some questions, and we will be having a little Q&A session and a discussion later on. But please do post any thoughts or questions you might have also during the presentations. Now, looking at the link with epidemiology, I would like to introduce Viola Greff. She's an independent public health consultant, and looking now, coming at the health perspective. Viola, are you there?
Yes, thank you. I will just share my screen. Okay, good morning. Hello, everyone. And thank you, César, also for your presentation, which feeds very well into mine. Just to start, as César mentioned, we really didn't find many papers on health impacts, so I will be providing a more general overview instead. So just to provide an overview of my presentation today, I will be briefly looking at the methods we used in our report, and then looking more broadly at an overview of pollutant sources, both offshore and onshore, and then focusing, just because of lack of time, on air and noise pollution, and then briefly on limitations in the evidence base and opportunities for the future. So briefly, in terms of methods for our scoping review and case studies, this was done as scoping searches, mostly in scientific databases, and with the time period of 2000 to 2021. So we didn't capture more recent evidence, perhaps on infectious disease monitoring. Findings were screened, and we also included some gray literature, mostly from organizational reports. We did not include local authority reports in the scoping review, but those were used in the case studies in Hamburg, Haifa, and Southampton. Just with looking at time, we will not be covering, or I will not be covering the case studies in detail, but hopefully you can have a chance to read them in the report. So giving an overview of sources of pollutants, we have a variety of cases of situations, both offshore to onshore, in which air pollution can be emitted, pollutants can be emitted into the air. So ship at sea, we have exhaust gases reaching the coast, high-speed increased emissions, maritime traffic, particularly among main sea routes, and also accidental pollution. Then when the ship is at berth, we have potential air pollution from berthing operations and maneuvering of the ships, then also exhaust gases when the vessel engine runs, vessel queuing, and high ship turn around times also contribute to this. Then at the terminal, air pollution from exhaust gases, particularly diesel run superstructures, bulk cargo dust, so for example, volatile organic compounds, and these also are emitted during unloading processes. And then in terms of port industries, this obviously varies, but industrial emissions and industrial risks associated with those contribute to air pollution too. And then when we come to the city and to the hinterland, it really is in the moving of cargo to the city or through the city. So exhaust gases coming from diesel run heavy duty vehicles, congestion idling also contributing to those. And then also in container use and transport along the road arteries. And in terms of visual and noise and odor emissions or pollutants, we have those coming from ships on visually seeing the smoke, and then illumination, so the use of light at the port cities, and also the light of roads. And in terms of noise, again, this is mostly concentrated to the ports. So it's also all the handling, shipping operations and cargo handling, particularly machinery, and of course also industrial operations. And more with the trafficking, so rail shuttles, shipyard operations later on. And then finally, with water and soil pollution, we have those on sea, so accidental pollutions, also anti-fouling paints, garbage, and all of and discharge into the ocean. This can also happen at the port through, again, cargo handling, accidental runoff and waste runoff. And in terms of soil, this is similar, particularly at the port activities. So briefly looking at air pollution. So air pollution is linked to a variety of health impacts, and is not just through shipping activities or shipping itself, but also, through vehicular traffic and cranes at the port. So as I just mentioned, all of the cargo handling, yard tractors and cranes contributing to these. And there's preliminary evidence suggesting that there's various contributions to different pollutants depending on the source of this. However, there's challenges in discriminating between shipping and general oil combustion sources in comparison of pollution data collected at heterogeneous locations between the study cities. So we found, as I had mentioned, quite limited evidence on health impacts. And within those studies, there was a difference of how air pollution data was collected. And this then also changed which health endpoints were associated to them. And briefly, so with SECAS and ECAS in the Baltic and North Sea, those will be reducing shipping-related air pollution and hopefully also have a health impact to those nearby cities. The question there being what this means for hinterland transport and regular transport, as I had just shown you in the table. In terms of noise pollution is linked to disturbed sleep quality, cardiovascular disease, hearing impairments, and also there's evidence on mental health impacts as well. There seemed to be a relative lack of noise exposure data in central and eastern parts of the WHO-European region compared to other parts of the region, and particularly industrial noise exposure. What was interesting was in the evidence, low-level continuous noise, so from maritime traffic and dredging devices. There's evidence that this disturbs marine wildlife and ecosystems, but there's also some preliminary evidence to suggest that continuous low frequency exposure, so for example, if you're living quite close to a port and there's a constant noise threshold that is not high frequencies and not obviously disturbing, but that this can also reduce overall well-being. And this, for example, is not included in mandatory reporting in the EU as it falls under the mandatory decibel measures. So briefly, in terms of limitations, so as I have previously said, there's no unified source apportionment modeling methodology to estimate relative contributions to different air pollution sources. This makes it particularly challenging when comparing health impacts across different locations. We mostly found observational data, which was influenced by location of the monitoring stations, so whether they were close or farther apart from the ports themselves or from the cities. And also these health outcomes vary depending on dose response functions that were used in the models. In general, we found a lack of diversity in health endpoints assessed and data collected, so not linked to environmental data. And most of the health points were to do with overall mortality and were not really disaggregated by particular diseases. Studies were also likely underpowered in smaller cities, so functioning more as case studies. And as again, mostly observational and modeling studies, which have risks of confounding and oversimplification. Now looking into the future, there's a few opportunities to improve this evidence base through routine monitoring with health endpoints used for both local assessments and epidemiological studies, and also generating evidence on the health benefits of any interventions tackling port or shipping related activities, such as environmental interventions to reduce any of the pollutants that I have just mentioned, and also being able to make the case that it's actually having an impact on the health of the nearby port city, and quantifying emissions also from port-related road traffic in general. Population exposure assessment segregated by onshore and offshore activities, or if possible, by both port and shipping related activities. As I mentioned, including mental health impacts due to environmental hazards from port related activities we did not find any evidence of that in the literature, and it could be a potential health endpoint as well. But in general, increasing local data collection as ports are heterogeneous, and therefore city-level health and environmental impact assessments are needed across the European region in order to inform adequate and appropriate interventions. Thank you.
Thank you, Viola. Now that's the epidemiological angle, but now the urban planning angle. We have Carola Hain, Professor and Chair and History of Architecture, Professor and Chair for History of Architecture and Urban Planning at Delft University of Technology. Carola, happy to have you online. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and thanks also for the other speakers for providing great foundational work. I'm here also speaking as UNESCO Chair and LDE Professor of Water, Ports and Historic Cities. What we've been doing for some time is setting up an initiative around port city territories, which is called Port City Futures, with the idea of connecting space, society, and culture, with the argument that we actually have only one space where all these, so one territory, where all these functions of ports and cities and territories play out, and where all the elements of health come together. As Victoria already explained in the beginning, we've been working on a strategic urban development action plan 2040 together with the UfM and colleagues from Delft, Roberto Rocco and Raymond Roy, with the idea, how can we bring more sustainable development to the union of to the countries around the Mediterranean. And one of the elements that we're currently working on is a port city access. And for me, the key argument there is that port city territories can actually be stewards of sustainable development, also because they are located at the edge of water and land, city, port, and territory. Now, and I think this goes back to also what César was arguing, we really need a comprehensive approach that goes beyond the port itself. So the way I've been trying to visualize it is to say, we need to think from the sea, through the dredging, to the port, but also to the dry ports, which sometimes can be 200 kilometers inland. So all the activities that are related to commodity flows need to be taken into account. Now, that might seem quite abstract, but let's start there with a very concrete example. So more recently, I've been taking my students on a trip through the port of Rotterdam, which you see here. You see us on the boat. The weather is clean, the air looks bright and beautiful, and we have all of this beautiful port city scenery behind us, including a cruise ship here hidden between the skyscrapers, and an old building, which was today's Hotel New York, which is the Holland America line, from which immigrants parted to the United States. Now, if you open up your air tracking device, like windy.com, you will, not necessarily on that day, but you might find situations like this, where this is the NO2 in the air. So it means that when you look at these devices, the air pollution from the ships and from the industries in a port like Rotterdam can spread far beyond the fenced-in borders of the port itself. Now, for a long time, we were looking at ports as being industrial machines trying to get goods as quickly as possible through to the hinterland. But these borders are not limiting the flows of water or the flows of air. Now, that means we need a much more comprehensive approach, as I just said, looking from the ship to the city, the territory, and the dry ports that might be located much more deeply in the territory. What we also need to understand is, if we look at a territory this big, that there are a lot of socioeconomic differences hiding on the ground, or embedded in the ground. And we need to very carefully define what we mean with health, because health, and you also pointed that out, is a very complex phenomenon. And we'll see that some areas with higher income, for example, that may be located in the middle of a port, have higher life expectancies as other areas nearby where we may have, for example, less income or lower educated people. So the measuring of what do we see as a global environmental impact in the air pollution and the impact on the individual person are very hard to define and to sort out. So that's why we've been trying to capture these different dimensions of how port and city and territory are intersected to understand which values actually play out. Because ports also have positive impact, including positive health impacts. And we have to be very careful to decide also what type of port is it that we're actually talking about. I've shown you the port of Rotterdam, which is the biggest of Europe and a very heavily industrial port with a lot of petroleum coming through. But if we were to look at different types of typologies, both from a perspective of geography, topography, usage. We might find ports that are focused on petroleum, but we might also find container ports and fishing ports and marinas. And sometimes all of these different activities are actually close to each other, located in space. And this is what we are currently working on to capture. So how can we plan the port city territory? So we only have one space, as I said before, where all of these activities play out together, both the positive and the negative effects of having a port territory nearby. So what we are currently working on is a geospatial mapping based on open source data of 100 port city territories in Europe. And we've started doing this by looking first at the maritime traffic, and from the maritime traffic looked at the 100 territories that we've chosen. So 25 per sea, 25 in the Baltic, North Sea, Atlantic, and 25 in the Mediterranean. And already by looking at this standardized mapping of the territory, here's the Mediterranean, we can see that there are lots of differences. So Cesar talked about the difference, for example, in northern and Mediterranean port city territories in terms of health. The geography is also very different. A city like Rotterdam has a flat open hinterland, whereas Geneva is blocked by mountains. So that plays a role. On the other hand, we will see citizen initiatives in Geneva to actually map the pollution. So this gives you a first insight. The book should be out by the end of the year, but a first insight on all the different activities that take place in port city territories. And again, we have insisted on choosing port city territories to see how far the impact of port on city and land goes, and also bringing in questions of heritage, of Natura 2000 sites, of all kinds of other elements that play out, and paying attention to the water, which I think is a key factor, so that even in places like Algeciras, we actually bridge over between water and port. Now, this approach of starting in the sea and bringing in questions of blue economy, blue spaces, and potentially blue health, I think it's key to what we are trying to do here in terms of switching a mindset. And that is particularly important for the Mediterranean, which has been born and has come into existence as a cultural space around a shared body of water. To really generate and promote this idea of how to think about port city territories, among others, we're currently finishing a serious game called Water Values, which will also be presented at the UN High-Level Water Meeting in New York in 2023. And it goes hand in hand with scenario building. So if we start from this idea, we want to develop and rethink port city territories as healthy territories on water and land, we need scenarios. And this is something where education comes in, where spatial planners and designers can help, from more concrete visions of a Rotterdam in 2080 to much more abstract and maybe dystopian or utopian visions of Naples here. So what I'm pleading for here is that we need strategies that are long-term, that are based on ecosystems, that involve inclusive societies, a rethinking of maritime mindsets, so starting from the sea towards the land, and actually bring in design thinking, including what we all call that are really design narratives, that are thoughts about how can we envision the future in a concrete way, but also in a very abstract way, to get discussions going and to decide what values do we choose to plan a long-term future. Thank you.
Thank you, Carola. We've now had the sort of the scientific background. We will now look at how that actually impacts in some case studies. And to be able to do this, I have three people who are going to give us three different case studies. We have Limassol, we have Barcelona, and we also have Tangiers. to start off with Limassol, Angelos Menelau is the head of Department for Maritime Trade and Commerce at Frederick University. And Angelos, to start off this round of the case studies, would you like to take the floor? Angelos, we can see your slides, but we can't hear you.
Yeah, thank you.
There we go.
Good day, everyone. And I'm glad to be here. And I would like to thank the Union for the Mediterranean and the World Health Organization for giving me the opportunity to present the Blue Limassol study, which is the first environmental risk assessment study which took place for the Limassol coastal area. The study is an outcome of the Blue Limassol Forum, which is a strategic collaboration between the Frederick University, our university, and the Limassol municipality. We have created this forum back in 2019 for the purpose of promoting blue economy and sustainability, always aligned with the well-being of the citizens of Limassol, and of course aligned with the UN Sustainable Goals. Back in 2020, we had the first forum where we had the citizens' opinion survey, which indicated many concerns among the citizens about the development taking place across the coast of Limassol. New marina has been established and started operation during the last decade. We had the skyscrapers and many other developments which created, of course, in more technical terms, what we call increased environmental pressures. This picture shows the geographic area of the study, basically, the Limassol coastal area. It's around 30 kilometers of coastal line, which is surrounded with a very vibrant, very, very energetic, cosmopolitan Limassol environment, which created the environment for being a very important tourist resort for the country. And of course, as you probably know, Limassol is one of the world's largest ship management centers and the world's largest crew management center. So it's a center of local and international business, and of course, a very touristic place. Rightfully, I would say, the citizens expressed concerns when they have seen this radical change to this city setup, which ultimately is affecting their quality of life. And as Professor Carola mentioned before, we have one place with many activities simultaneously taking place. And the environmental pressure has a collective volume, which I don't know if so far has been estimated elsewhere, but I think there are very limited studies to examine the collective environmental risk. And this study, the Blue Limassol study, attempts to do that. In Limassol, we have, of course, the port operation, shipping operation. We have the largest commercial port in the country. And as all the ports, it's a major source of pollutants. And during the last years, we have also the increased oil and gas activities in the other side, in the eastern side of the coast, which we basically try to collect all the infrastructure to accommodate the needs for the energy transition era. We have the new LNG terminal, which is about to be developed, and also the FSRU unit, which is also a very important infrastructure, critical development, I have to say, in this energy transition era. Aquaculture and fisheries, out of the 10,000 tons of aquaculture fish being produced in Cyprus is done in the Limassol district. And nowadays, I'm sure you know that we eat more aquaculture fish than wild fish. But to produce 1 kilo of of aquaculture fish, we need 2 kilos of feed. So lots of waste, which of course are affecting the bathing ecosystem of the seas. Marinas and recreational yachting is also a developed industry in Cyprus, which is taking lots of intense during the last years. New marinas are about to be developed in the other two cities of Cyprus, Larnaca and Paphos. The Limassol Marina, which is already operating for about a decade, is accommodating about 850 yachts. And with the other marina, the smaller marina in Limassol, together they accommodate approximately 1,000 yachts. We have the skyscrapers developing like mushrooms in the city. And of course, in the short term, we may be happy that this is a boost to the economy, but in the longer term, we will face the problems of the density of the population, and of course, all the relevant consequences, including the microclimate changes, the traffic congestion, which is expected to increase, and of course, with all the environmental consequences. And the solid and liquid waste, I have to say that we are one of the top countries in terms of waste. Out of each household is producing more than 1 ton of waste per year, and some of this waste ends up to the sea as a litter waste, and of course it's affected the aesthetic as well, the ecosystem. So many activities taking place in many activities taking place to the coastal zone of Limassol, and of course an increasing environmental pressure and lots of concerns among the citizens. And this was the reason which initiated this study, which is a study which engaged more than 25 researchers and included interviews among 88 organizations, including all the monitoring authorities in Cyprus and of course the maritime stakeholders. And the methodology is quite known. We use the IMO formal safety risk assessment to identify the risk at first. We try to collect data from monitoring authorities. Actually, we have collected all the environmental incidents during the past 5 years in order to create one baseline report which assisted actually the researchers in identifying all the risks, explain them, and at a later stage, analyzing both the quantitative data and also qualitative data among the interviews which took place. And through focus group, we assessed the risk in order to locate them to a different level. And the different level was the outcome of the probability of the risk to happen and the consequences, of course, the impact of the event associated with the risk. The study also offered a number of recommendations at the high level.
So, sorry, Angelos, can I ask you to try to wrap up quickly, so we can manage to try and get through all the case studies? Thank you.
Yes, please. So I will very swiftly go through the major risk, which was identified to be the leakage of oil, the products, and the disposal of oily waste. The port and commercial shipping, of course, is one of the sources. Oil storage and transportation, recreational yachting. There is no monitoring authority who can guarantee that the 1,000 yachts which are passing through the touristic area are complying with the environmental regulations. And of course, the water sports is also another source of smaller pollution. The second major risk is found to be the releases of sewage and contaminated ballast water. I mentioned before the construction, of course, during the foundation, the buildings, they are pumping lots of contaminated water to the sea. City sewage network, especially during the rainfalls, intensive times, they are exposing contaminated water at sea. And of course, the shipping operation to a lesser extent are also contributed to this risk. And I will I will wrap up my presentation just to mention the major areas of deficiency, which is, I think, is quite important. Fragmentation of responsibility among different overseeing bodies. We spent about 4 months collecting the data from 5 different monitoring authorities, and actually there was no integration of data, which ultimately leads to no solid results and actions. Lack of insufficient application of technology, insufficient sampling capabilities, and of course, absence of long-term planning, which is something also mentioned by Professor Carola as something which authorities should look. This narrow focus is also creating insufficient monitoring. We need also to educate the young generation and build more environmental consciousness among them. Respectively, we made the recommendations, and we are working with the authorities in developing a data sharing platform. Our universities collaborated with the Cyprus Port Authority and the Department of Environment in creating this platform. We try to standardize the report. It's very important to develop KPIs among the different activities which are taking place in order to be able to evaluate and to build rational policies which are targeted to the priorities. And of course, use of technology is very important to deal with the increased yachting activities. Thank you, and this is just some highlights of the research, and thank you for giving me a little bit of extra time.
Thank you. So from flying over from Cyprus to the western end of the Mediterranean, we now have Barcelona, and Jordi Torrent is head of business strategy for the Port of Barcelona. Jordi, over to you.
Hi, thank you. I hope you can hear me well.
Yep.
Can you? Okay. I will try to catch up a little bit because I believe we're running behind schedule a little bit. We are known as a port where vessels catch up with delays, so I will try to do the same with this session. Okay. I'm trying to share my screen, and it doesn't seem to work now. Let me share my screen. It seems I'm not authorized. Is it possible?
Let us check.
Yeah, can we just check if Jordi is able to share his screen, please? There we go. We can see your screen, Jordi.
But you can see the presentation?
No, we can just see your desktop.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I don't know why you cannot see my screen. Let me try again. No?
We can see it's your screen, but we see the Zoom webinar.
Okay, so I'm so sorry. I think you have my presentation. I think you have it yourself, so you can share it yourself and go to the first slide directly. I will start anyway without the presentation. I believe
the technician will share it now. Sorry, yes.
Okay, so don't worry. So I'm already late. So let me go into the business directly. I wanted to start with some perspective. Go to the first slide, please. I wanted to start with some perspective on the impact of, go to the first one, please, on the impact of the Port of Barcelona in one of the major issues, that is one of our major concerns, which is the quality of the air in the city that hosts us. And to put these things into perspective, I have listened to the previous presentations. We are, as a Barcelona, we are not an industrial port, and this is very important when it comes to health in port cities. I'm not going to name other ports, but I attend very regularly conferences where I have colleagues from Northern European ports that say that the port activity represents more than 20% of some pollutants in the air of a whole country, not a city, a whole country. We are not this case because we don't have, as I mentioned, we don't have industrial activity at the port. So our measure when it comes to the contribution of the quality of the air of the city, water, noise, and comes basically from the vessels operating at the port. And the impact is relatively small, except if we speak about SOx, which maybe we can have time to speak about this later. Okay. In the last 20 years, the port has basically focused its environmental strategy in 3-4 items. One, quality of the water. Second, reduction of pollution. How? Basically, by promoting rail transport, promoting some terminals. For instance, the only 2 terminals where still have some industrial activity, which are related with bulk traffic. So improving the terminals handling equipment. And third, promoting the use of LNG, okay, for bunkering operations, etc., which we know it's not a convenient fuel for fighting climate change, but is a good fuel for fighting some pollutants, for the reduction of some pollutants. Okay, this is what we have done in recent years. Go to the next one, please, to the next slide. And this is what we'll be doing in the coming, what we are doing since 2021 with our new strategic plan that was approved in January last year, and which basically has identified around 40 different measures in order to reduce this impact of the port activity in the environment, water, etc., which I insist is very small compared to industrial ports. And I think this session could have made some kind of comparison between industrial ports and non-industrial ports, because the impact is substantially different. And this would be very clarifying for the public opinion. So having said that, our strategy, and go to the next one, please. Our strategy for the coming 5 years is basically around these 4 pillars, which have to do with developing a new energy model in the port. How? Basically, being able to generate renewable energy in the port. Okay, this one, and we have lots of possibilities here, as you will see later. Second, work towards decarbonizing the port activity, basically, and here we have our main projects, which is the deployment of onshore power supply in the port, in the different terminals in the port. Pollution reduction, basically through this alternative fuel, until we have the carbon neutral fuels that will come, let's hope sooner than later, methanol, hydrogen, etc., etc. But in the meantime, using LNG in order to reduce pollution in the air of the city. And finally, increasing our share of intermodality of rail in the port. So these basically the 4 pillars of our environmental strategy for the coming next 3-4 years. Go to the next one, please. The next one, please. So the first pillar, as I said, being able to generate more energy and sustainable energy in the port. Here, we started already, obviously, a few years ago, but as you can see here, we have lots of potential to increase a lot the production of renewable energy in the port, basically through solar energy. And we have, in this respect, we have a very good opportunity because the Port of Barcelona is the port that has the biggest logistics activity zone inside the port. We have more than 1 million square meters of warehousing that we can equip with solar panels. We haven't started yet, but we still have lots of room for improvement here. And also we have other facilities in the port where we can generate a lot of also renewable energy. For instance, this week we tendered the installation of a terminal, the fisherman's terminal in the port, that will all the energy that will be used in this terminal that accommodates the few fisherman vessels that we still have in Barcelona will be generated in the terminal with solar panels, etc., etc. So this is just an example of all the things we can do in order to be able to generate renewable energy inside the port area and making use of the different facilities we have. Go to the next one, please. The second main project, and probably the most significant project we have, is the deployment of onshore power supply in the port. Nowadays, we have only 2 OPS connections in the port for these mega yachts that are berthed at the port for maintenance, painting, etc. But if everything goes as planned, already by the end of next year, beginning 2024, we'll have already the first OPS connections in the container terminal you have on the left-hand side of your screens. The terminal of Hutchinson will have already a connection. So we plan to have between 2023, 2024, 2025 container and ferry terminals connected, and 2026 the cruise terminals also connected. So this is a project with a budget of 110 million euros, that will allow us to have at least container, ferries, and cruise terminals connected in 7 years. Okay, as you know, the electricity required for the different terminals is very different. You don't need the same electricity for container terminals or ferry terminals than for cruise vessels. So that we have made this timeline, because the needs of electricity, for instance, for cruise vessels, it's much higher than for container vessels. So to the next one, please. Then, as I said, reduction of pollution. We all know that LNG is not a good solution for climate change, but whilst we all work towards being able to use carbon neutral alternative fuels, being methanol, hydrogen, ammonia, whatever, we believe LNG is a transitorial solution to reduce pollution in ports. In Barcelona, we started a few years ago with bunkering operations for cruise vessels and ferries with LNG that reduces substantially the amount of SOx, small particles, and NOx in the air of the city. Last year, we had more than 200 calls with LNG ship-to-ship and track-to-ship bunkering operations, and we hope this can increase in the coming years. And finally, next slide, please. The fourth main pillar of this strategy is to increase the penetration of rail, of intermodality in the port. Nowadays, and this might seem small figures, but nowadays we have 15% of the container traffic of the port that enters or leaves the port by rail. As I said, it might seem small, but if we consider that the remaining 85% that comes by truck basically has its origin and destination very close locations to the port, because Barcelona and Catalonia is still a very industrial city, so it's very difficult to attract to rail tracks that go to locations less than 100 kilometers. So we have been very successful in attracting to rail traffic that goes to locations 300 kilometers away from the port, for instance, Zaragoza, southern France, Madrid, etc., but not so much in diverting to rail traffic that goes to 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 kilometers, because it's more difficult. Truck transportation is very competitive there. So our main objective in the coming years is trying to attract part of this traffic also. And for instance, for cars, the market share of rail in the port is around 40%, which is very high. But for solid bulks, liquid bulks is smaller. So that's also one of our main objectives for the coming years, also to attract part of the traffic of trucks that come to the port to collect cereals, soybeans, etc., to divert them to rail. For this, we have planned different investment, both in infrastructures, operations, in order to be able to attract this traffic into rail instead of trucks in the coming years. So this is basically the four main pillars of our environmental strategy for the coming 3-4 years. And on the long term, and I guess you still have one slide more on the long term, because this our strategic plan that we approved for the period 2021-2025 had also a vision on the port in 2040, where we plan to be climate neutral, etc., self-sufficient energetically, etc., etc. So this is a little bit our vision for the port in 2040, which completes our short-term strategy that I have just presented in the few minutes I had. So I think I have managed to make my presentation in less than 10 minutes and to catch up some of the delay for today's session. Thank you very much for the invitation again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jordi. That's also very much appreciated. And to round up our case studies, now moving to the south coast of the Mediterranean, Tangiers, we have Mohamed Maghazi, who's the port commander and director of operations for the port zone of Tangiers city. Mohamed, are you online? And over to you. Mohamed, we see your presentation.
Yes.
Now we hear you too. Thank you very much.
Yes. Bonjour. Donc, mon intervention sera en français. Donc, je vais vous présenter. Le projet.
Oui.
Oui. Donc, je vais vous présenter le projet de reconversion du port de Tangéville ou de la zone portuaire des ports de Tangéville. Il s'agit de l'un des projets les plus marquants qui ont marqué les 2 dernières décennies au Maroc. Il s'agit d'un projet royal qui se veut comme une vision, une stratégie pour accompagner le développement économique et social de Tanger afin d'assurer l'équilibre nécessaire et garantir le respect de l'environnement conformément aux normes et à la réglementation nationale. Donc, je vais commencer par la description des contextes du port de Tangéville ou de la zone portuaire avant le projet de reconversion. Donc, le port de Tanger réalisait un trafic de marchandises diversifié en augmentation continue, plus de 40 escales par jour, plus de 3 millions de passagers par an, un trafic important tir avec une évolution annuelle à 2 chiffres, plus de 100 000 camions tir en 2009, un trafic de produits en vrac générant des poussières, le kauna, les céréales, et un trafic de conteneurs diversifiés, y compris le trafic des marchandises dangereuses. L'évolution des standards de la sûreté portuaire et nécessité des espaces de terre-plein pour la régulation et le contrôle des unités de fret avant l'embarquement, en l'occurrence le code ISPS et ses exigences. Le port était encerclé par la ville et surtout l'ancien Médina de Tanger et manque d'espace pour l'accueil et le traitement des marchandises passagers. L'évolution et le développement des zones franches industrielles logistiques au niveau de la région de Tanger. On parle de ces zones franches avec une superficie globale de plus de 1600 hectares. Je vous donne l'exemple de la zone franche de Tanger. C'est une superficie de 450 hectares, 60 000 emplois créés, plus de 30 secteurs d'activité, première zone franche portuaire au monde et 6e zone franche mondiale. Évolution de la population de Tanger, pratiquement environ 600 000 en 2000 pour atteindre 1,3 million en 2022, pratiquement en 20 années. La population a doublé, ce qui présente une exception par rapport aux autres villes marocaines. Les aspects environnementaux qui ont marqué le port de Tangéville avant la reconversion, donc l'émission des gaz issus des navires en manœuvre en escale au port, on parlait de plus de 40 escales par jour, perturbation du trafic urbain de la ville par les moyens de transport roulants, en l'occurrence le tir et le conteneur, perturbation du trafic routier urbain par les véhicules passagers, émission des poussières issues de la manutention des céréales et des kaolins et des produits en vrac, émission des gaz polluants issus des échappements des moteurs thermiques, pollution du sol, et de l'eau par les huiles d'essointement issues des moteurs thermiques, génération des bruits par les véhicules et les moyens de transport, stationnement abusif au niveau des voies aériennes de la ville, blocage de la ville lors de la saison estivale et occupation des approches des sites historiques par des terre-pleins pour le traitement des fret. Donc, comme j'ai dit tout à l'heure, donc en 2010, les pouvoirs publics et les institutions territoriales ont décidé de repenser les liens des ports de Tangéville avec, la ville et surtout pour accompagner le développement socio-économique de la ville et avoir toujours la maîtrise sur les aspects liés à l'environnement. Donc, le projet a été initié en 2010 par Sa Majesté. Donc, le projet a deux dimensions, portuaire et urbain, projet à forte vocation touristique et culturelle. Par la suite, création de la SAP en 2010, la société qui va s'occuper du projet de reconversion. Et par la suite, en 2012, la création de la société qui va gérer le port. Les objectifs du projet de reconversion, c'est à ce que Tanger soit une destination phare pour le tourisme de la croisière et de la plaisance au niveau de la Méditerranée et bien sûr assurer une reconversion optimale tout en respectant l'environnement et tout en maîtrisant les aspects environnementaux liés à l'exploitation portuaire. Donc, dans ce contexte et dans le cadre d'une approche de développement territorial intelligente, intégrée, le port de Tanger a été construit. Il a été mis en exploitation en 2007. Exactement en 2010, le nouveau port était prêt pour accueillir tout le trafic marchandises des ports de Tangéville et par la suite permettre à la ville de Tanger, au port de Tangéville, de se spécialiser exclusivement sur l'accueil des navires croisières, les passagers, les navires, quelques navires, 4 navires face ferrée qui assurent la liaison avec le port de Tarifa et bien sûr la marina de Tanger qui représente aujourd'hui la fierté du projet de reconversion. Donc, l'activité croisière, donc le port connaît beaucoup de modifications, donc beaucoup d'adaptations pour augmenter notre capacité d'accueil, donc des extensions des quais, des approfondissements des terre-pleins et l'investissement sur des superstructures et infrastructures. En ce qui concerne l'activité de plaisance, donc la marina a été lancée et en exploitation en 2018 avec, pour la première phase, avec des bassins de 15 hectares et une capacité d'accueil de 1400 anneaux. Donc, également dans le cadre du développement socio-économique de la ville de Tanger, donc l'ancien port qui faisait partie intégrante du port de Tangéville a été reconverti en marina et un nouveau port a été construit pour répondre aux besoins de l'ensemble de la région de Tanger. Également, je m'excuse. Oui. Également, comme j'ai dit tout à l'heure, le projet a une dimension urbaine également. Donc, la SAP a pris en charge la restauration du muraille, la réouverture et réhabilitation des anciens portes et des rampes et le ravalement des façades des constructions donnant sur la muraille. Une nouvelle mosquée a été construite, des locaux pour le commerce d'artisanat et des espaces publics qui ont permis l'ouverture du port sur la ville. Donc, la question qui se pose, c'est que c'est vrai, le projet de reconversion a permis la migration, le déplacement des activités polluantes à un nouveau port de Tanger. Est-ce que cette action-là est une action environnementale efficace? Je dirais oui, parce que toutes les activités qui ont été transitées au port de Tanger-Med, l'infrastructure était prête aux standards pour maîtriser les aspects environnementaux et toutes les activités ont été gérées dans le cadre du principe de la délégation du service public, bien évidemment, avec un cahier de charge qui maîtrise l'ensemble des aspects environnementaux et qui exige les mesures nécessaires pour une parfaite maîtrise de l'activité et pour une meilleure préservation de l'environnement. Aujourd'hui, la ville de Tanger, et d'après les sondages, c'est la ville la plus demandée par les cadres marocains. Elle a été classée la première ville au Maroc grâce à son aspect, grâce à l'intégration globale qu'a connue la ville et grâce à la maîtrise de l'environnement et des aspects environnementaux de la ville. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you, Mohammed. That was a very interesting presentation looking at, we've had 3 interesting presentations looking at 3 different Mediterranean port cities, also geographically nicely dispersed there. As you've noticed, we are running a little late, but we would like to just try to extend just by a few minutes, just to be able to have at least 1 round of questions. And I would like to just very quickly, I'll ask the participants a question, but I would really appreciate it if you were able to answer your question in a minute or less. So we'll see if we're able to do this. First of all, Cesar, I would like to ask you, you mentioned that port traffic and urban population tend to overlap. And this can cause congestion and pollution. And I wonder, is it correct that ports and cities have grown apart in recent decades, or are you able to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, thank you, James. Yes, so there is, how to say, historically and geographically, there is a kind of obvious overlap between the amount of traffic and the size of the coastal city around the port. But in Europe, of course, in Europe, of course, this continent is quite specific compared with other continents because many large cities are situated inland. So some ports are small. Some ports can be very large and serve the distant hinterlands and cities. But in terms of size, except from this historical, let's say, co-evolution between ports and cities, there is, of course, since the 60s, 50s and 60s, a movement of separation, physical and functional, between ports and cities. One reason is a technological and economical. The growing trade and growing size of ships have pushed ports away from city centers. This is very well known in the literature and in reality. But it doesn't mean that every port is non-urban or every coastal city is not a port city anymore. So the port is always around the city in some way. The links are still by road or land transport, for example. If you take the case of Felixstowe, London is not considered as a port anymore, but there is a Felixstowe, huge container port at the entrance of the Thames River, and massive flows of trucks go from Felixstowe to London. So this port city separation is real, but it created another phenomena, which is massive congestion and pollution on the land side. So port cities in Europe and elsewhere are squeezed between, let's say, proximity, distance, land transport pollution, coastal pollution. It is a very complex system which goes beyond the city itself. Yes.
Thank you, Cesar. And over to you, Viola. Could you elaborate just very quickly on, I seem to remember you saying that there was insufficient health data, but what health data would you need in order to hold substantial epidemiological research?
Thank you. Very briefly, so we would need a collaboration, really, essentially, of public health authorities in cities and port health authorities and port authorities in general to share data that is both environmental data and health data, because the health data, cardiovascular disease, mortality, and these endpoints, they are collected, but they're not being shared and also not being studied and analyzed by researchers. So that's my short answer to that.
Thank you very much. And succinct is wonderful. And Carola, would you be able to elaborate a little bit on what sort of ways are there for public participation in I guess in Seaport planning?
Well, the idea that we have is that we, in some ways, you need bigger entities to bring together the various institutions involved. And you have to have platforms to actually talk to each other. So one of the things that AIVP, for example, is promoting are port centers. So any organization where you could have regular engagement and exchange between the different groups involved. Another thing to mention is that a Marie Curie fellow postdoc working with me is working on contested ports, trying actually to bring together to bring together all these communities next to ports that are engaging with port extension, port pollution, and different stories. So there's a lot of collaboration between ports, there's collaboration between cities, but there also needs to be a way to connect citizens and to have platforms like the roundtables where people can actually exchange their different ideas and needs in that large territory.
Great, thank you for that elaboration. Just looking at from the 3 case studies that we had, I'd actually like to jump to you first, Jordi. Something I'm also personally interested in, based on the work of this office, is up to now, which do you think is the one project or initiative of the port that's had the most positive impact on the fight against climate change?
Intermodality, rail. Until we have an alternative fuel that can run for massive transportation by sea, and while vessels are berthed at port, our main contribution, I would say, in reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, etc., is the increase of the market share of rail intermodality in the port, I would say.
Okay, great. So rail to tackle climate change and emissions. We have, but looking at Limassol and Tangiers, I would actually like to ask you both the same question, if you would just be able to very quickly just give an indication of what do you think has been the largest challenge in overcoming environmental pollution? Just give me your top 1 or 2. What is it? Are we looking at, is it technology? Is it regulation? Is it finance? What do you feel has been the biggest challenge for you? Maybe Angelos, if you would like to quickly start.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think it's definitely the greatest challenge I'm talking of for Limassol and the port of Limassol specifically is to adapt the infrastructure and the operation to the new energy transition era. For Limassol, for example, we tried to create the shore-to-ship supply of energy during the berthing of vessels, which creates other 2 challenges, that still in Cyprus we are burning heavy fuel oil. So if we do that, we're still facing the problem that the source of the energy will still be. So we wait the natural gas to be implemented and in Cyprus by 2025. And of course, at last, it requires funds. And the terminals are suffering from the COVID and now the Ukraine war. So definitely we will need also the financial side to be looked. I foresee that the EU will have to support in terms of grants for the terminals to do this infrastructure development. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mohammed, if you're there, can you also maybe just from the perspective of Tangiers, what do you see as your biggest challenge?
L'enjeu le plus important, donc après avoir terminé le projet de reconversion, bien sûr, nous en tant que port, nous devons toujours garder l'écoute et se concerter avec l'ensemble des parties prenantes afin d'identifier leurs besoins en termes d'environnement et de santé et de bonne cohabitation et de voisinage. C'est très important de garder cette approche-là. Et en plus, le port de Tanger-Ville, il s'est mis dans une démarche de smart port. Donc, on a beaucoup investi sur la technologie et sur le respect de l'environnement. Donc, aujourd'hui, on pourrait dire que Tanger-Ville, c'est l'un des ports smart port au niveau du nord de l'Afrique et au Maroc. On a investi aussi beaucoup sur l'environnement. Donc, on a installé 2400 mètres carrés de panneaux solaires pour la production de l'électricité verte. On a installé, on a adopté une analyse environnementale approfondie qui nous a permis de lancer un programme d'action, en l'occurrence les panneaux photovoltaïques. On a installé des huileurs débordeurs pour filtrer les eaux de pluie avant qu'on les jette en mer. On a travailler sur la consommation des ressources naturelles. Donc, tout un programme qui a été adopté dans le cadre d'une approche, comme j'ai dit tout à l'heure, consultative, participative, avec l'ensemble des parties prenantes, dans le cadre des objectifs qui ont été assignés à notre projet. Donc, pour nous aujourd'hui, l'intelligence, c'est un enjeu important. L'écoute des parties prenantes intéressées par l'environnement, c'est très important. Et également rechercher toujours l'excellence pour adopter des procédés de travail innovants pour le respect de l'environnement.
Merci beaucoup, Mohammed. And I think with that, we are drawing to a close today. And I also, first of all, would like to thank everybody for staying connected just that little bit longer so that we could just have that extra little round of delving deeper on a couple of different topics. I very much appreciate there in those questions, everyone being short. Just a final mention, if I do ask everyone if you would like to draw your attention to the chat, specifically looking at the health data question. Viola and Katharina have expanded on that a little substantially, taking into account the consideration of the dynamic nature of ports and how we and the health information that we would need to actually have more in-depth analysis there. So, but thank you for putting that into the chat to help us save time. Please do have a read of that. I also would just like to point out the new WHO report on this subject will be available in the coming weeks. And as registered participants to this webinar, you will be informed as soon as that is published and publicly available. And we will be letting you know. Thank you to everybody who connected. We hope you found that interesting and informative, and particularly also to all our speakers and presentations and those three very interesting case studies from around the Mediterranean. Thank you for sharing those with us. And with that, I wish you a wonderful start to the week and a happy Monday. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, James.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.